Good evening, everyone, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Fireside Chat with our two guests, Kamaldeep, the Chief Executive Officer of the International Alliance of Patient Organizations, and Thomas, who you all know very well. I will give a brief introduction shortly, but before I start, just a little bit of introspection and discussion on what we have been through as a world and as a patient community on this pandemic. Way back in 2019, late 2019, when we just heard about the outbreak, the world had not anticipated the kind of devastation that this pandemic would cause and the kind of grief and the kind of difficulties that people would be put into in terms of healthcare. When we saw the very difficult pictures from New York last year, we as a community, as a medical community, as a patient community, all of us gathered together to prepare to fight this pandemic. And we thought we had put everything behind when the vaccines were developed and there was a lot of hope in the world. However, we have seen that country after country has faced not only a second wave, but is preparing for a third wave. And we see devastating pictures from many countries around the world where patients are really struggling to manage the pandemic as healthcare institutions and the public health infrastructure collapses under the onslaught of this pandemic. As a patient organization, we believe that the patient voice has a lot of value and that should be at the center of everything that we discuss. We believe in co-production and co-delivery, but this pandemic and anything to do with the pandemic, whether it is the vaccine production and delivery or the medications that go to treat the COVID-19 infection, patients have been completely taken by surprise. They have had no opportunity to be able to discuss and dialogue with their own stakeholders at the country level or even at the global level to be able to input their experiences of what it has been to lose their loved ones to the pandemic, or even to have survived, but to have had lots of post-COVID-19 complications that are now emerging as medical fraternity discusses about this. It's my privilege, therefore, today to be able to introduce you to this fireside chat where IAPO, as an institution that represents the patient voice, has been fortunate to be able to have several dialogues with the industry representatives on how we should be able to manage the vaccine production and vaccine delivery. This session is being organized as a follow-up to the industry's COVID-19 vaccine development status updates. And if you remember, at the 9th Global Patient Congress in September of 2020, and at the 2nd Asia Pacific Patient Congress in December of 2020, we had exclusive sessions with patient representatives on the panel, leading a discussion with industry representatives on availability of vaccines and what it would do to change the current scenario around the pandemic. We discussed the roles of regulators, of pharmaceutical industry, and how do we drive efforts to prepare for future pandemics. At the most awaited Global Patient Congress 2020 session titled COVID-19 Vaccine Development for Future and Current Pandemics and Public and Patient Engagement in Clinical Trials, Thomas Cueni gave us a broad view of the unique collaborative effort to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. He highlighted how unprecedented this effort was in many ways and in many aspects, including the speed as the fastest vaccine ever to be developed since Ebola in 4 years. The attempt was to cut this down to 12 to 18 months. The volume, the number of vaccines, if I see the data that has been uploaded as of May 18, the number of total doses that has been given to the world is 1.4 billion doses. That's phenomenal, considering that we just started maybe 6 months to 8 months back. Aside from, of course, the seasonal flu shots, polio, which is 450 million doses, and COVID-19 will probably require 15 billion doses, as more than double the doses required for immunization. He also highlighted that these unprecedented numbers require unique collaborative efforts and logistics to make it available and affordable at a global scale. A lot has happened since our Global Patient Congress in September and the Asia Pacific Patient Congress in December. So much that it feels like a decade has passed. rather than just barely 8 months. At this session, we aim to evaluate where we are now and how we get to where we want to be, where every person is vaccinated and safe, with a focus on the driving forces behind the success, as well as the areas where things haven't been working so well. We will also discuss the unique opportunity and role of patient organizations with respect to country readiness and pandemic preparedness. So please join me in welcoming Thomas. He is the Director General of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association, also called the IFPMA, the global association of the research-based pharmaceutical companies and associations. It is based in Geneva and has official relationships with the United Nations and contributes industry expertise to help the global health community find solutions that improve global health. Mr. Cueni is the secretary of the Biopharmaceutical CEO Roundtable, a policy forum of the global CEOs of the IFPMA member companies. He is also the chair of the business at OECD Health Committee and also serves on the board of directors of the City Cancer Challenge, an initiative aiming to improve cancer care in major cities in low and middle income countries. In addition, Mr. Cueni serves as the industry co-chair of the APEC Biopharmaceutical Working Group on Ethics and the chair and the board of the cross-sectoral AMR Industry Alliance, a group comprising more than 100 companies and associations representing pharma, generics, biotech, and diagnostics committed to tackling the threat of antimicrobial resistance. A very warm welcome to you, Thomas. It's also my pleasure to introduce Kamaldeep Sami. He's our CEO and of the International Alliance of Patient Organizations and has an academic background in public health and law and has a passionate belief in improving access to services through digital health and justice services. As the managing director of an international children's legal center, he led the team of international lawyers improving the rights of child, including right to health, by applying remote courts. He has also served as the Chief Executive Officer of an international mental health charity specializing in niche mental health services supporting young people and adults with complex mental health issues. Kamaldeep is a passionate advocate at WHO's human rights-based approaches to health and strengthening of the institutional legislative policy practice and standards framework. He believes this support is needed to achieve the health goals outlined in the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Specifically in SDG 3.8 to ensure universal health care for all. I am Dr. Ratna Devi and I'm the chair of the Board of Trustees of the International Alliance of Patient Organizations. I also run a patient group, a cross-disease patient group alliance in India and work for patient rights and access to healthcare in my own country as well as the Asia Pacific region. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Fire Chat. Over to you, Kamaldeep.
Thank you very much, Ratna. To everybody, all the attendees who are attending this webinar, I'm just waiting for Thomas to correct his video settings. He's having some challenges. I hope it's be okay. But in the interim, let's take the advantage of this interlude and sort of reflect on these issues. As many of you who joined us at our Global Patients Congress in September of 2020, when the outlook was very bleak, I think, and we were all in our first stage of our lockdowns. Thomas and his members turned to us and said, let's have a discussion on this at the Global Patients Congress. And we all sat down and we reflected on what the picture would be. And as you all remember, there were many promises made and many scenarios painted. And the first scenario that they painted was we would have viable candidate vaccines ready for licensing in January of 2021. I think we are happy that that was delivered. But what we had not anticipated, I think it was slightly anticipated by one of the speakers there who had worked with the Ebola crisis from the MSD, I think Jane Valerie, and she had worked quite intensively on rolling out that vaccine. And she had said that it wasn't the vaccination the vaccine that saved life. It was really the vaccination program. And therefore that success of everything depended upon how there was social acceptance and how governments reacted on that. I think to that degree, we have all been having different experiences. I think some of us have had quite easy going, but others have had challenging. That it was inconceivable, and we couldn't work on this. Okay, Rachel, could you just ensure that Thomas can join in? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yes. So we were having these challenges that which came on to us that some of us couldn't see how quickly we could inoculate the population. And I think one of the big issues that it was raised quite often at that time that we are looking at inoculating or immunizing somewhere around. Thomas, thank you very much. Good.
I believe I was on just as audio because I didn't see the camera. I didn't.
Yes,
see
you put it down.
on.
Yes, I said your LinkedIn. So yes, Thomas, thank you very much. We have introduced you very well in your absence, but thank you for this.
I heard that now in the introduction. Therefore, I was already on, but as normal audio.
Okay,
but it's such a pleasure to be back with you.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, so Thomas, without much ado, now I was just coming to that point. So where are we now? And how did we get here?
Happy to share perspectives, and my apologies for joining actually a few minutes late, but the topic which I discussed just before was equally important because COVID-19 did remind us of the pandemic, which quite often has been forgotten, namely antimicrobial resistance.
Yes.
Where actually I just learned from Dame Sally Davis that not 700,000 people a year, but now it's estimated 1.25 million people a year die from resistance to antibiotics. And Dame Sally and I were invited as guests to I think the first ever workshop of G7 finance ministry Sherpas. And of course, I jokingly said maybe the finance ministries can do more than the health ministries to help us get to the novel antibiotics. And we also had a couple of senators, bipartisan from the US, on that discussion. Therefore, I've come out truly optimistic, and I've come out truly optimistic because we have seen actually in COVID-19, and COVID-19 is still ravaging the world. You know, when you look at the situation in India right now, but when you also look in quite many countries in the world, we are still confined to lockdown. We are suffering from pandemic fatigue, but the reality is that still far too many lives are lost. And I'm, of course, deeply sensitive to all our impatience to make sure that we not only continue the vaccine rollout, but we actually continue the vaccine rollout bearing in mind the need for vaccine equity, because it is unjust when you have rich countries such as the US vaccinating healthy 12-year-olds with very low risk of serious disease from SARS-CoV-2. And because of the crisis situation in India, vaccines are not reaching priority population or healthcare workers in Africa. But having said that, and I will come back to that later, I will, briefly give you an overview of how far we have come, because we did talk about this a few months ago. And last summer, for example, if you would ask experts on vaccine development, most of them would have hoped that maybe by summer 21, we may start to see vaccination programs. Now, what we have seen is an amazing success and triumph of science and an amazing success also of triumph of partnership and collaborations. It was quite amusing to see a German Ministry of Finance official referring to the power of biotech, and he was thinking about BioNTech. But then, of course, together with that, you had Pfizer bringing in the know-how of scaling up vaccines. And when I look at the challenges of ramping up vaccine scaling up, we do see that it's not just science you need, but you also need the ability of producing in large volumes. Therefore, we have seen the fastest vaccine development ever. Before COVID-19, the Ebola vaccine took 4 years to develop, and that was much faster than the 10 years it took before. And we have not only seen one vaccine, but by now we have 6 vaccines which got WHO emergency use license, WHO also PQ. Actually, 2 of them were the AstraZeneca Oxford one, because one was AstraZeneca Oxford with the Serum Institute of India. The other one is them with SK Bioscience in Korea. Those are really the 2 truly important partnerships. But then we have had Pfizer BioNTech, we had Moderna, we had J&J, and most recently we also had Sinopharm from China. Therefore, we have now a range of vaccines, but we still, of course, are confronted with this colossal task, pre-COVID-19, global vaccine capacity for everything. Yellow fever, hepatitis A, B, pneumococcal, whatever, measles, rubella, was 5 billion doses a year. This year, we need 10 billion doses just for COVID-19. And I've had many debates and meetings over the last 3 months with WHO, with Seth Barkley from Gavi, Richard Hatchett from CEPI, with UNICEF, and also WTO. Can't we be faster? Can't we, develop this? Because we all, and I'm sure it's the same for all of you, we are keen to touch each other in person, to meet each other in person. I had a nice, anecdote in the previous meeting where a senior Ministry of Finance official from Japan said, "Oh, how nice to meet you again, Thomas. Last time we met was in the margins of TICAT in Yokohama." And that, of course, was in 2019. I haven't been back to Japan since February 2020, which really was when people started to realize that COVID-19 was to some extent similar to the Spanish flu. Now, how did this happen? It happened because industry was acting not as business as usual. Industry actually engaged in partnerships, in open collaboration, in multiple discussions in terms of the science, but also in signing up partnership contracts and signing up technology transfer contracts for scaling up, not now, but already starting in March, April last year. We wouldn't have been able to come that fast if the regulators hadn't, also moved to business not as usual, because normally, between a phase 1 clinical trial and a phase 2, and then a phase 3 clinical trial, you have 2-3 months interval to look at the data. But here you had the fastest probably recruitment ever, because here we were not talking about an orphan drug or cancer study with 200-300 patients or even fewer. We had 40 to 60,000 people enrolled in them, and you did a lot of things in parallel rather than in sequence. Now, having said that, I think we have seen the first vaccine approvals in early December. We have seen the first start of vaccinations in December in the US and in the UK. Most of the rest of the world slowly as of January. But what we also have seen, of course, from the beginning, there was this feeling about, why do we have to wait that long? I actually yesterday got an email from a colleague and friend of mine who said, my mother is 79 years old and she is in Italy and she doesn't have a date for even her first jab yet. whereas, as I said, in other countries, we start to vaccinate 12 or 15 years old. We all know that there is this, now there is this, I think, frustration and agitation. Why is it that rich countries get so many more vaccines than poorer countries? Now, at the beginning, I have to admit, I felt more at ease, because at the beginning, when you look at where did COVID-19 hit hardest, it was in Europe, starting in Italy, in the UK, in the US, in Latin America, for example, Brazil. Some of the countries, I think, the national health systems were not quite up to the job. In some of the countries, you had presidents basically denying that COVID-19 was such a problem. You had some countries where mask wearing was seen as you're a coward. You had some countries where the normal non-pharmaceutical interventions, like containment, like lockdown, was seen as, why the hell are you doing it? We will continue to party and behave as usual. But still, and that is interesting, this is not like HIV/AIDS, where it literally took 10 years for the antivirals to reach patients in sub-Saharan Africa, 10 years after they were approved by the FDA. It is not H1N1, where literally the rich countries bought up all the vaccines and antivirals until they realized that H1N1 isn't quite as dangerous, and then they tried to unload them. But solidarity was not high up on the agenda. Here we did see first deliveries from COVAX, the partnership where we, IFPMA, are partners. I do sit on the COVAX coordination meeting literally every 10 days. We saw the first deliveries to Accra, Nairobi, Kigali, and Abidjan 88 days after WHO gave approval. Not a year, let alone 5 years, but 88 days. Actually, the very same day the first vaccines reached Tokyo, which people often forget. But we now see, I'm apprehensive whether we will see the Olympics this year in Tokyo. I think public health concerns should prevail, common sense should prevail, but we saw that. And we have 67 million doses which were delivered through COVAX, and 67 million is not negligible. It actually probably is already quite significant if you start with healthcare workers. And I was very pleased through my social media, WhatsApp system. I noticed that some of my friends in Kenya hospital had been vaccinated way before I had a date for vaccine. And I'm part of a vulnerable population because Kavaldip and Ratna, you may know, I'm 67, therefore I'm basically sort of priority population. By now I am vaccinated, but by now I also must say the situation has changed because of the dramatic situation in India. India was the biggest exporter of vaccines, in particular the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine, to COVAX. And that has trickled. Many of you may have seen yesterday, Arnab Poonawalla said probably not before the end of the year we will resume. That's why, and that's important news, which you may not have seen yet, we did come out this morning with a joint statement of the innovative biopharmaceutical companies and vaccine manufacturers from Bio, IFPMA, our colleagues in Europe, with a 5-step plan to urgently speed up vaccine equity, because we can't really remain silent. And the steps which we announced, which we call for, is fastest is rich countries need to start dose sharing. I can, transparently tell you, a few weeks ago, I sent a personal, passionate letter to the president of my country, Switzerland, and said, look, Switzerland procured more doses than you need. And you are now making advances in vaccination program. You do have doses which are not approved yet. Please start sharing them. I haven't received the formal reply yet, but I read in the media that they do plan to share 3 million doses with COVAX. And I think that's what needs to be done. I was very pleased 2 days ago that President Biden said that before the end of June, the US wants to share doses of vaccines which are approved, which means not doses which they don't intend to use, but doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech, the Moderna, and the J&J vaccine for COVAX. And I expect that we will see more such announcements. We had President Macron calling up on world leaders, do please, start sharing doses. Actually, the first country doing so was New Zealand. I was rather amused because co-chair of the CCM is Jane Halton from Australia, and she honestly admitted, I've been more successful with New Zealand than with my own country. And New Zealand actually was the first one to announce that they will share, I think, 200,000 doses. It's a small country with COVAX. Therefore, we need that. The second element where we really are committed is we need to leave no stone unturned to further scale up capacity. And we co-organized with CEPI, the Coalition on Epidemic Preparedness and Innovation. More than 2 months ago, we reached out early in the year. We always knew that manufacturing scale-up of complex biological process is difficult. We organized the Chatham House Roundtable, and then a month later, we helped Dr. Ngozi, the new Director General of WTO, who used to be the chair of the Gavi board, to organize a WTO summit looking into the challenges. What is interesting, and I will not fudge any question any one of you may have about the so-called patent waiver, but what was interesting, all the experts agreed that the problems faced right now is trade barriers. For example, use of Defense Production Act in the US. You have seen a Serum Institute calling out through a tweet to POTUS, President of the United States, please help me. I need, critical ingredients. Otherwise, my product lines are stuck. I cannot deliver. I know, for example, that Pfizer-BioNTech are expecting, they originally hoped to get 1.3 billion doses this year. They now are very optimistic to make 2.5. Actually, they, I think, make no secret. They hope that they will, at the end of the year, have 3 billion vaccine doses, which basically would be about 30% of what you need to vaccinate the world's adult population. Their vaccine is composed from 280 ingredients, which comes from 86 different suppliers, passing through 19 countries. Imagine what, disruption of supply chain, like you have an export ban on giant plastic bags that doesn't affect Pfizer-BioNTech, but for example, J&J or Novavax, would it be impacted? Most of them are manufactured right now in the US. If you have a lack of filters which you need, or a lack of lipids which you need to encode the mRNA, therefore this is a problem. The third call of action which we did convene with COVAX is when you have shortages, and many of these raw materials are in short supply and high demand, you normally have compensatory action. All of us are consumers, and we have seen early in lockdown, there was suddenly a crisis of toilet paper. But somehow the first, compensatory action, oh my God, if I run out of toilet paper. And of course, that compensatory action then leads to a shortage of toilet paper. You have seen the same in vaccine supply chains. Therefore, together with CEPI and COVAX, we agreed to set up a matchmaking facility with a third party where you bring suppliers and manufacturers together, and hopefully you can increase the efficiency. The fourth one, of course, is from the beginning, when I count over the last 15 months in vaccines alone on COVID-19, we have seen almost 300 partnerships between academia, Oxford with big pharma, biotech companies with big pharma, or with contract manufacturers, Moderna with Lonza. We have seen huge partnerships between, for example, industrialized country manufacturers, with Serum Institute or with Aspen in South Africa, with Biological E in India, or SK Bioscience in Korea, or company Fioricruz in Brazil. Therefore, a lot of partnerships, and we have also seen more than 200 of them involve technology transfer. And I've recently organized a joint media briefing with my colleagues and now friends from the developing country vaccine manufacturers network, from Bharat and from the DCVMN. And they said, honestly, you cannot coerce this kind of partnership. This needs to be based on trust, on checking out whether the recipient of technology is up to the quality, to the GMP, because vaccine manufacture is 70% quality control, quality assurance, good manufacturing practice, and people are concerned if substandard vaccines, let alone fake vaccines, would reach people who are desperately waiting to be vaccinated. Therefore, we did submit this 5-step, program. We went public this morning. Paloma from my team will happily share with you if you haven't seen it yet. But now I'm really interested to get into our Q&A, because we talked about the fireside chat. If I don't want to have just a monologue.
Okay, no problem at all. No, we were so fascinated by this. I think I thought let Thomas run with it. I think you really brought out the gist of what was needed. So thank you, Thomas. I think this is very interesting. I think you have answered my first question very brilliantly, that the driving success forces, you've covered those very well, that there was that industry collaboration. There was great partnership. I remember one party was using somebody else's facilities. One party was contributing one part, like the GSK one. They were giving, supplying each other with Sanofi. They're looking at modulators, other ingredients. Then you talked about that regulatory innovation that was coming in, that the regulators really jumped onto it, and for the first time, they really helped us get across this. And then the most important bit, I think, that you've really addressed in this question was now the supply chain innovation. I think that really made things happen. So that, having set the scene for me correctly, now I need to ask you the third question, which is very important now. What else do we now need to achieve that global herd immunity that we talk of? And what do you consider that maybe patient, industry, and regulator partnership would look at to achieve that global herd immunity?
I think Kamaldeep, this is really the crucial and critical question. Now, patient groups and patient associations, patients, all of us, what we can do is, talk to people who are afraid, who are concerned about side effects, are concerned about our vaccine hesitance, who believe, because we are young, or I'm not obese, I'm not sick, COVID-19 for me is really, it's less than a flu. I think to talk to people and help to expand vaccination, because originally, and there's a World Bank study still widely quoted, which said if we have 10 billion vaccines, with that we can vaccinate 60% of the world population by March 22. And that would suffice to reach herd immunity. Now, there are two reasons why, sadly, herd immunity is no longer widely talked about among experts. One is the moment you had the variants, whether it's, and allow me to use their geographic origin rather than the numeric names, the British variant, the South African one, the Brazilian ones, they're the easiest, P1, P2, or now the Indian one, you needed to increase vaccination rates from 60% to 70, maybe even 80%. And that's a tough act to get. We see vaccine hesitancy now slowing down vaccination rates in the US. Therefore, it will be difficult in terms of in measles, you need 90% plus, and I think we're almost there in many countries, but that's tough. The second one is that most experts sadly now expect SARS-CoV-2 in one form or the other is likely to stay with us, similar to the seasonal flu. And therefore, yes, the vaccines are great. They're extremely effective. But on the other hand, you will need treatments, because there are people who for one reason or the other don't want to be vaccinated or can't be vaccinated, because some people are, they can't get a vaccine because they suffer from allergy or for different reason. That's why we will need to continue and hopefully really vaccinate as many people as we get. And one of the elements where you also can play a role is you did see our, our vaccine equity movie. More than 30 million people already watched these video clips. And I think what I find powerful with them is it is from people who are themselves involved in vaccine development, know what vaccine development means, what vaccine manufacturing, but they also have a personal background, a personal story. Therefore, spread the news, use that. Then we also do need, and that's why, I really looked forward to us meeting, we also need to be very transparent and honest about the benefit safety profile.
Yes.
For example, some vaccines, we always knew if you do have clinical trials with 40,000 people, that is massive. But then if you vaccinate 100 million people, a side event and a serious one, which may occur once in a million, it's still 100 people. And that's why I personally must say I'm really grateful for the thorough assessment which we have seen by organizations such as WHO or EMA or FDA or others, trying to come up with balanced assessments. I still believe, Mike Ryan, the emergency crisis ADG from WHO, when he was asked, would you take this or that vaccine? He said, I would take any vaccine which is on the market now, because the benefit far outweighs the risk of me, being struck down with COVID-19. At the same time, of course, when you do have certain risks higher for young people, or for elderly, or for women, then I think it does make a difference. And that's why UK and many other countries have adjusted their strategies to respond to that. And I'm basically a numbers man, but what I said is, if in one age category the benefit risk is 3-1, now 3-1, that's quite impressive, but the 1 is a person, it's a face like us. The 3 is a number, statistical. And I recently read an article, a lunch with Daniel Kahneman in the Financial Times. And Daniel Kahneman, of course, the Nobel Prize winner of behavioral economics and science, he said, actually, we are used to people dying from disease. People dying from a vaccine, that's sort of unacceptable. That's why I think we need to have honest conversations about this. And that's where we collectively, in terms of transparency, laying out the facts, responding to the concerns, not treating people who ask critical questions as ignorance, I think we can really help. But the most we can do is, from our side, committing to really make sure no one is safe until everyone is safe, and we really need to see progress on the vaccine equity.
Okay. Thank you, Thomas. That's brilliant. I think the point you have really raised, I think, which was that when Dr. Tedros at the WHO had covered at the very onset when he declared this a pandemic, he said this virus is new. Our immune system has never encountered it. It's never been there, and therefore it is not like the run-of-the-mill illness, and therefore it will be a learning process throughout as we're going on. So we've done well. Now, with this respect, that this is something new, and when you're rolling out, we have appreciated very much. I think that the transparency and the way you've taken things head on with the real world data that's now coming in, and that if something was missed out in 40,000, But if there are 1 million patients, there will something be outliers on them. But having seen that, I now like to see you address some very critical issues, I think. And that was the political angle of it. You have addressed in part that you're working towards how are we to address vaccine nationalism? I think that's something that our colleagues in Africa and elsewhere have been asking. What are the ways forward to address that?
I really think we need to call it out. We need to shout out. That's why I did mention my letter to the Swiss president, which did lead to a reaction that they want to share. I'm really pleased to see that, you know, the US is starting to share big way. But actually what I said, we need to see these dose sharing now and not in 4 or 5 months. I was shocked recently when a politician in my country, it's a lady, she said, we need to first vaccinate our folks and then we can talk about what to do with the addition. I think there we really need to show more solidarity. I'm pleased with the way the EU has acted there. You know, there was, and we criticized the export permits severely. My colleagues from the European Trade Association, FPA, criticized severely. But as a matter of fact, there was only one publicized instance where they stopped. And I think this was, I don't quite know why it was. It was something from Italy to Australia, but that was the one exception. Otherwise, there was, of course, this shouting match about why is, you know, one company slow in delivering, because vaccine manufacturing is complex. We have seen some of the biggest, most seasoned vaccine manufacturers having bumps and glitches. We have seen 15 million doses wasted in one of the most experienced contract manufacturers in the US. I've seen in Switzerland, where Lonza works with Moderna, they were far slower in scaling up than, for example, the same company Lonza in the US. And when I tried to find out why, it was lack of skilled labors. Therefore, we really need to do more. On the positive side, I just yesterday again looked at the data. We work with a London-based science intel company, Affinity. We now have, by end of May, 2.2 billion doses done. Therefore, from 0 to 2 billion doses, you know, for new vaccines, that is amazing. And their forecast is end of the year estimate 11 billion doses, which means if that happens, we would have enough vaccines to vaccinate the adult population. But as I said, I really hope that rich countries start sharing. I also saw, you know, a question in the chat box. I saw that Philippines, by the way, as well as Vietnam, they recently signed bilateral deals. That's where I'm not dogmatic. I do understand, for example, the African Union signed a big bilateral memorandum of understanding with Johnson & Johnson because COVAX at best had as an objective to vaccinate 20% of the population, and every country wants to vaccinate, you know, the 60% plus. Yes. And that's why we need to have a combination of that. What I'm also rather satisfied is COVAX no longer is short of money. They still need an additional $1.7 billion for this year, but with the forthcoming summit of G20 in Rome, with the forthcoming G7 meetings in the UK, I'm really optimistic that will happen. There's one element which I'd like to mention already now. We are already committed to working on future pandemic preparedness. And I was a few weeks ago invited as a speaker to the African Manufacturing Summit, because one of the elements which many of you may have noted is we have vaccine manufacturing big way in the US, in India, in China, and in Europe. There is not much in Africa. There's more fill and finish capacity with Aspen. There's a company called Biovac in South Africa. You have a tiny facility from Sanofi Pasteur in Senegal, and there are 2 others. Basically, when you look at it, for COVID-19, none of them would really be fit for purpose for this huge scaling up you need. And that's why when you look at where are the most successful scaling up happening, it is the companies who have the least dilution, the least distraction from having 10, 15, 20 partnerships. That's where Pfizer, for example, and BioNTech bought a facility from Novartis in Germany. That one on their own should manufacture almost 1 billion doses. And that's where you see the power of 20 plus years experience in doing it. That's also on the positive side where we have seen companies like Novartis, Bayer coming in. And what is rarely talked about, we have seen companies, you did mention GSK, and I was absolutely delighted over the last 36 hours because GSK is one of the companies like Sanofi and Merck & Co., 3 of the 4 biggest vaccine manufacturers, who encountered more flops and challenges and disappointments, but all of them have teamed up with others. Sanofi and GSK now, I think, are in a good way that their vaccine, a little bit later than the others, but it looks very promising. GSK has 2 more projects with different partners, very promising. Merck & Co. is expecting to come up with 1 billion doses of the J&J vaccine, which has the advantage of single dose in the US. Therefore, even the companies whose projects didn't succeed, they are in there to help out. That's why, you know, when you look in Korea, SK Bioscience or Samsung have huge facilities. That's why a lot of the tech transfer happened with Indian manufacturers like Serum Institute, Biological E, because they do have this scaling up experience. They have pre-qualification. And occasionally you read about companies who say, oh, we could come up with another 100 million, 200 million. One of them I Googled, I shall not mention it for now, they've never manufactured a single vaccine. Never.
Yes.
And I'm not sure that I would want, you know, a vaccine where don't have the confidence that they really know their stuff.
Okay, Thomas, the other, I think, very pertinent question, and I think it's very important to address this here. I think you have been very modest in the other success that your members have done, and that's in the realm of developing rapid tests for COVID. I think, for instance, Roche, which led on the lateral flow tests, and there are others who developed some of the PCR tests. Now, how important are these, what I call concomitant developments, to help us in controlling COVID? Because we now have to start thinking of eliminating it. We can't just talk of controlling it. Do you think your members could contribute further towards this? Is there a way to go ahead of this stampede? You know, right now we're just chasing it, you know, and so we are, as I say, we are beggars can't be choosers. We have to do whatever is going to, but how do you see that? Could that be scaled up as well, trying to bring in this testing?
I think there are a number of elements I actually see. I have to honestly admit I never tested myself because I'm extremely cautious and prudent, and now I'm vaccinated. Therefore, but my son probably had at least more than 10 tests because he is in Oxford. He traveled over Christmas, and therefore you have to test it. Test and trace is a really important tool to contain. And I think we have seen, and actually what I saw, because of the rapid development, tests have become much cheaper. Probably the companies don't like it that much, but that's the way it worked. That's why I jokingly say, when you look at projections, that, you know, the booster shots will cost 5 times as much as what you pay now. When I look at it, actually, if you aggregate company projections for this year capacity of 20 billion plus, Affinity thinks 11 billion might be a lot. But I do expect that by next year, we may have more vaccines than we need. And I'm curious as an economist to see what impact will that have on price. But the other element, we have had disappointments in treatments. None of the treatments has really worked as the super drug, the magic bullet. Many of them actually, if used at the right time with the right window of treatment, like remdesivir, like the monoclonal antibodies, but pre-hospitalized patients, and you need to go to the hospital to get the infusion, like even anti-inflammatories. For example, President Trump, he got monoclonal antibody. Prime Minister Johnson got at the right time an anti-inflammatory. They help, but none of them is really, the magic bullet, the curator. I do believe that monoclonal antibodies will continue to play a potential major role. I do believe that we will see new antivirals. Those which already existed, for example, those used in HIV/AIDS, didn't really work out, but the new ones, I expect that we will really see very promising results. And I think the industry in vaccines were developed with a lot and huge public-private partnerships. In the treatment area, I see companies were really willing at risk to invest their own money and engage. And I think that's what we will continue to see, because we really see also already now willingness of companies to engage in pandemic preparedness partnership. In 2 weeks' time, there's a big life science meeting in the margins of G7 health ministers in Oxford. And one of the talks will be about what can we do now to be better prepared for the next. I think it's very important.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Now, I would like to bring in Dr. Ratna Devi. I think this is one of, Dr. Ratna is now in a country which has got many paradoxes in that. It's one of the biggest exporter of vaccines. It's one of the most seriously impacted countries of that. And therefore, it's got all this going on in the background. I think I can paraphrase the words of their Indian Medical Association's director, K.K. Agarwal, who sadly passed away yesterday. And he left such a big message for us that abhi to film baki hai. That means the show must go on. Ratna, tell us how can we work with Thomas to make this show go on? Thank you.
Thank you, Kavaldeep. I think what you said in your introductory statement about India, that we are a country of paradoxes, is so very true. Also, given the perspective that we are a population of 1.3 billion, anything and everything that happens in India has that kind of magnitude. So when this infection hit us for the second wave, the numbers that you saw were something that is to do in relationship to the numbers that are there in terms of population. So if you extrapolate a smaller country with a similar infectivity rate, then you would have same numbers in that country if they had the same population as India. Having said that, there are several lessons that we have learned over the last 8 to 10 months. So we were one of the first countries to roll out the vaccination, especially for frontline workers and people at risk. However, there was a lot of vaccine hesitancy, and even doctors and other healthcare providers were not very keen to take that vaccination when it was initially introduced. So there was a surplus. A lot of vaccination was getting wasted at those vaccination centers. People were not willingly coming forward, and that, I think, was an opportunity lost. We did not get enough time to really work on the communications to dispel that vaccine hesitancy and the lot of myths and misconceptions that were there amongst populations about the efficacy of the vaccine, and more than the efficacy, the after effects. So there were a lot of apprehension on whether the vaccine was really effective, whether it would have long-term side effects. I think that communication did not really percolate well to the last mile, and therefore a lot of people were hesitant to take the vaccine. Having said that, the vaccine has mutated very fast, and we have seen so many variants, and therefore that has again left the medical community perplexed, because people in this country, are seeing different kinds of responses to the infection. So there are some who succumb very fast. There are people who are critical on ventilators for more than a month and then come back. Almost perfectly normal. We still have to see what kind of after effects the infection has. But in the midst of all this, we still have been a country that has been able to give almost 10% of the population its first dose, which is incredible considering that the world is at around 9%. We still are a country that has almost given more vaccinations than entire countries put together in some of the other regions of the world. If you see data, then countries like France, if you see the vaccine hesitancy, then people who are not vaccinated and are unwilling to be vaccinated are more than 50%, which is really not true in the context of India, at least not after the second wave. So now there is this eagerness to get the vaccine, but the supply chain is still not there to be able to manage that kind of demand that is there. So there is an unprecedented demand because now there are people who believe that if you have 2 doses of vaccine, then the infection is much less and mortality and morbidity is much lesser as well. And to your point about the former IMA president, he had received both the vaccinations and still succumbed. So there are a lot of unanswered questions that the medical fraternity is now discussing as to what kind of comorbidities actually enhance or the progress of the disease faster. What is it that is actually adding to mortality, even though you may be vaccinated fully? And then we are still learning because there have been messages, especially for one of the vaccines, where initially it was second dose after 28 days, and then it was changed to 4 to 6 weeks. And now they are saying it must be maybe 12 to 16 weeks. So which one is the correct window for the second vaccination that produces the maximum protection in terms of antibodies is something that people are still learning. We don't have the data to be able to understand what is it that will actually work. Similarly, there is now a guideline from the government which says that if you have had COVID infection, you have natural antibodies, and therefore you should wait for your vaccination for 6 months. So again, this is a guideline that has come out recently. It has created some confusion in people's minds because a lot of people thought that, or understood correctly, that the vaccination prevents the severity of the disease. It does not prevent the infection. So this new guideline that has come, which says you have natural antibodies that you develop, and therefore you must postpone your vaccination for 6 months, has created confusion, especially for people who have already vaccinated themselves and were previously infected. And then there are several cases where people who had been infected, have taken 2 doses, are still again infected and might have run a fairly difficult course of the disease. So I think the world has to still learn a lot. And in terms of a country with not so great public health infrastructure, we've done fairly well in containing the pandemic. We are now seeing the numbers decline. What we now need to do is to prepare the country for a possible third wave and ramp up and build up the confidence of the population as well as the confidence of the medical fraternity to be able to manage the pandemic well.
Thank you very much. I think that is very good on that. Now, I think I need to ask the final question to both of you, and then Dr. Ratna can thank Thomas and wrap it up. Thomas and Ratna, do you think vaccines should become the center pillar for all health conditions now in our primary health care? That we must go back and look at vaccines for life approach and ensure that we have a preventative approach to everything. Thomas first, what do you think?
Personally, I believe that our behavioral approach still is so important when it comes to many non-communicable disease. Let's face it, we have also seen it with COVID-19. If you are smoking, if you are, obese, if you are suffering from hypertension, your risk of succumbing to the disease is much higher. Therefore, I have to admit, I do believe in doing my daily fitness run and looking at my Apple Watch and checking out whether I'm closing circles and do that. But I think what we have seen, the real game changer in the vaccine were the mRNA. I don't believe that we will have mRNA as the platform for everything, but mRNA could play a big role, for example, in cancer treatment, probably not vaccination, could play a big role in influenza vaccinations. And, there weren't that many people who believed that this would work out, and we wouldn't have a chance of reaching 10 billion doses this year without mRNA. But the other element, and Ratna sort of touched on it, I've seen many countries where a public health crisis, like for example, tuberculosis in Japan, did trigger huge healthcare reform. I believe in the importance of UHC. I believe in the importance of capacity building and infrastructure and vaccine readiness. I recently came across, we had countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo or Malawi or Sudan handing back vaccines to COVAX because of vaccine hesitancy, because of lack of country readiness. Therefore, I do believe that, this is a wake-up call to make sure that we do more to invest in really UHC and other elements. I have to apologize. I need to quit because Charles Gore from the Medicines Patent Pool is patiently waiting for me to talk about quality licenses. But I really enjoyed being with you again, Ratna and Kavaldip, and I look forward to joining you again on future occasions. Therefore, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you, Thomas. And thank you. And Kavaldip, I'll just close that loop, that Thomas addressed. I firmly believe, as a representative of the patient voice, that the life course approach is very, very important. And to the point that Thomas raised about non-communicable diseases, there are many cancers and other diseases that are actually preventable through vaccination. And if these people did not have cancer, they probably would not have the comorbidity that would progress the disease if they're infected by COVID-19 faster. For example, cervical cancer. Similarly, pneumococcal, vaccinations would help save a lot of aged populations who had been infected by COVID-19. So I think as part of universal healthcare, life course approach to vaccination is extremely important. And that should be included in the public health dialogue wherever universal healthcare is being discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ratna. And Thomas, as always, is happy to join us. And thank you very much to everybody who joined us. Please keep on looking at this. We will be addressing some of your concerns. We have taken some of the chat questions and we will be putting out something after that. As you know, to everybody, I would like to now say that please note, this is not the run-of-the-mill pandemic. This is a new condition. It's a novel virus. We don't know how it will react, how it will work. But what will work is old-fashioned patient solidarity, working in collaboration, and taking care of yourself and your neighbors and everybody. So thank you very much for that. And let's hope that for our next Congress, we have got an invitation from our friends in Geneva in 2022. We would like to meet in Geneva, and we could have everybody meeting us there, and we could travel there safely and mark the 75th anniversary of the WHO in the great pomp and ceremony that we like to do. So thank you very much. Take care wherever you are. And please do contact me if you like. I'm always here for you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Kamaldeep. Thank you.